But Seth, tonight we're talking about the Head Triad. Why don't you jump in? What should we know?
Yeah, all right. You guys good? Good to see you. So as just a reminder, everybody has the gut space. Everybody has the thinking intelligence. Everyone has the emotional intelligence. We all, think, feel, and do every day, right? It's just that we tend to prefer one type of intelligence over the other two. And if you're in one of the triads, it's because you have strengths and liabilities having to do with feelings, or having to do with how you think, or having to do with how you intuitively respond. This mic sounds interesting to me. Is it okay? Sounds weird out there. Is it? Okay, cool. Just sounded different than you, but that's all right. Cool. So just some of the themes. We've talked about the 8, 9, and 1, the 2, 3, and 4. So the instinctive triad, or the gut triad, the 8, 9, and 1s, they're about maintaining a felt sense of self because they're concerned with resistance and control of their environment. And then again, the feeling triad is about maintaining a personal identity, kind of conjuring up the right image to get their needs met. So then finally tonight we're talking about the thinking triad, which then is about finding an inner sense of guidance and support. So this is the way that all of the 5, 6s, and 7s are connected and why they're in the thinking space. Because they're all looking for inner guidance and support. So the major themes for the 5s, the 6s, and the 7s are that they're all concerned with strategies and beliefs. And they tend to have issues with insecurity and anxiety. And so then what they're all seeking together, what all 5s and 6s are seeking, is security. And then they have an underlying core emotion right underneath the surface of fear, which is what is driving a lot of their behavior, if they're really honest and they look internally. And like we've mentioned the last 2 weeks, there is a pattern in each triad. For the head triad, it has to do with how each type deals with fear by running away from it or fleeing from it. So I think we've got this in the slides. 5s flee inward due to their fear of aspects of the outer world. 7s flee outward due to fear of aspects of their inner world. And 6s kind of do both options. 6s flee inward to avoid external threats and outward to avoid internal threats. That's kind of the pattern for each of the triads. So with that said, with that little groundwork laid, I think we'll jump into describing the 3 types in the head triad. So we'll jump to the 5, the beginning of the triad. Here we go. So the 5 is often called the investigator or the observer. 5's key motivations are to be capable and competent, to master a body of knowledge and skill, to explore reality, to remain undisturbed by others, and to reduce their needs. 5s are often, not all the time, but they're often the brainiac. For 5s, knowledge is power. A story for you guys. Last year I saw for about 6 to 8 months a spiritual director. This is a guy that just guides you spiritually, as it sounds. As a kid, he grew up. For some reason, his parents were in tune with what he was looking for, what he wanted, and his parents got him a set of encyclopedias, and he read them all the way through as a little kid.
Nerd.
So again, knowledge is power for 5s. So there's an unconscious need for every type that we've hit for all the other types previously. For the 5s, the unconscious need is to perceive, and what this means is to fully understand something. Largely because what 5s fear most is obligation, intrusion, emptiness, surplus, being ignorant, overwhelmed, dependent, or invaded. And so they have a core desire to be capable and competent. 5s walk into a room and subconsciously think, what information do I need to understand this environment? Often 5s are the person in the back of the room, kind of taking information. They like studying things, but they don't like to be studied. 5s feel like they don't have enough inner resources. They want adequate external resources so that they never have to depend on other people. So they often actually have a private room in their house where they can retreat to. Fives think that too much time with other people is incredibly costly. So they have a measured sort of amount of energy. Every personal interaction is taking of them. A friend of mine who's a 5, because every personal interaction is taking, he will, by the end of the day, for survival reasons, make sure that he's at his home and his private space before all of his energy is gone, like without even realizing he's doing it. And if he does stay out too late, he's the boss, and so he gets to make the choice of sleeping in so that he can kind of recoup all this energy. If he stays out too late, he will go ahead and cancel meetings and sleep in, because it's about energy conservation a lot.
Is this your friend who's a pastor a little ways north?
Oh, it could be.
Does he know? Okay. I mean, I didn't. Okay. All right.
Yes, it is.
Look, I mean,
Yes.
I offended my wife last week, okay? So, people are doing okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate you sharing that anecdote.
Yeah, I think he'd be fine with that. I think. Fives. So there's what's called the focus of attention for each type. This is sort of where the type's energy naturally gravitates to without realizing it or thinking it. So for the fives, their focus of attention is, what do you want from me? Again, intrusion is a fear if there's energy conservations, every personal interaction is taking from them. So their focus of attention is, what do you want from me? Privacy is very important to fives. Fives often don't like to feel responsible for other people's stuff. Sometimes when people ramble, they can get impatient. Fives can manipulate others by staying preoccupied and detaching emotionally from others. It might look like they're with you. Physically, they will be, but they've retreated into their mind palace. Isn't that from Benedict Cumberbatch? What's Sherlock?
Oh,
there you go.
Okay. I thought you just made up that phrase. I was impressed.
I wish.
Mind Palace.
No, it's a real thing.
That character is definitely a 5, right?
Yes, lots of people think he is.
All right. Next week, we're just going to type fictional characters. Here, come back for that. I'm sorry. But keep going, though. I'm
Mind
sorry.
palace, yes. Fives control their needs and live a very simple lifestyle. They have boundaries around personal space. And it's often not very easy for them to share personal information or feelings. I've heard it said, if you ask a 5, what are you feeling? Pretty much every time they'll tell you what they're thinking. Fives use analytical knowledge to substitute feelings. They can overvalue self-control, and they tend to be the most emotionally detached Enneagram type. Which means this usually is one of the only numbers that is truly capable of neutrality. 9s might think they are, but they have an opinion underneath the surface. Yeah.
You can say that because you're a 9.
Yes, it's true. Often 5s are actually a little bit more sarcastic and cynical than other types. This isn't entirely 100% true most of the time, but it can be true. 5s tend to delay their emotions. So if Christmas is on Tuesday, 5s feel it on Friday.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because emotions are this thing you can get caught up in, and they analytically process before they go into the space that's unending, overwhelming,
So they like analyze the gift exchange, and they analyze the warm fuzzies around the table, and then like maybe 2 days later they think, that I experienced happiness.
Right, and they're not
Right.
And they're not going to do it with you.
Okay, good. They do it in their happy place. What do you call your friend's room?
Mind palace.
The mind palace. Keep going, I'm sorry.
I'm leaking.
Someone in here is a 5 and they're so annoyed right now. They feel like I'm making fun of them. And I'm not. I love you all.
My best friend is a 5. So if you're 5, let's be best friends. The lost childhood message, there's a lost childhood message for 5s, for every number. This is sort of a message they didn't hear enough, believe to be true, or sort of that was spoken over them to counteract how they're already predisposed to be in the world. So for the lost childhood message for the 5s, it's that your needs are not a problem. And so because they don't believe that or hear enough of that to counteract, they take on an unconscious message and think that it's not okay to be comfortable in the world. So there is, again, like we've done with all the types, there's a deadly sin or a passion, which just means suffering. It's the emotional suffering or emotional habit for the type. The passion for the 5 is called avarice. These are all weird old words, but to get a little more deeper into avarice, 5s feel that they lack inner resources and that too much interaction with others will lead to catastrophic depletion. So this passion leads 5s to withhold themselves from contact with the world. Again, even though they're physically with you, they're often just in their mind palace. Thus, they hold on to their resources and minimize their needs. So to finish up here with 5s, at their best, 5s are analytical, persevering, sensitive, wise, objective, perceptive, and self-contained. At their worst, don't worry about it. At their worst, they are intellectually arrogant, stingy, stubborn, distant, critical of others, unassertive, and negative. And lastly, 5s on the diagram, they move instinctively to the 8 space in secure situations and instinctively to the 7 space. This is a really interesting number. I just want to point out something here. A lot of the numbers with their lines of connection, if you look at the diagram, you have a diagram up there? If you look at the diagram, they're connected to at least the other 2 centers of intelligence or one of the other triads. The 5 is never moving to the heart space, which is interesting. Just a thing to notice. Yeah. That's all.
So it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but many 5s have a hard time getting in touch with their feelings. Is that a fair statement, or would you say it differently?
It's just it's a delayed thing. It's just too much to process. You can't really process emotions the way analytically very well, so they wait for a while to do that on their own, where it's safer. Cool.
I have a couple follow-up questions, but anything else on the 5 you wanted to hit?
That's it.
So as you're describing this type, what I started picturing was your description of a 5 makes me think of like someone who I really respect and find interesting, but I often find myself thinking, I bet they don't like me very much. You ever have people like you meet and you're like, I could stay at dinner with this person for a while. Like they seem great, but they do not seem to care too much for me and my silliness or my, is that, I mean, it's a gross caricature, but you're describing how they're very analytical. They might be with you physically and not emotionally. I don't know. Does that even make sense? I'm just sort of just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, I do think certain numbers can perceive other numbers to be a certain way, but it's just perception. But perception's pretty much all the time strong enough to produce results. Like
one unfair stereotype of a 5 may be they can come across as standoffish, right?
Sure, yes. Yeah. They can kind of seem aloof.
Yeah.
That's how they're often described.
Sure.
But that's just because they're in their brain.
Yeah. And we talk about these things not because we're trying to stereotype people or poke fun at anything, but to help you as you're trying to identify what your type may be or other people close to you that you love, what their types may be. Talking about some of these misconceptions can be helpful in trying to then backtrack into identifying with your type. So someone described once to me that 5s, they're the sort of person where they, the 5s are your person who's doing the internet deep dive for 2 hours. Right, so something comes up in a social setting, somebody references like an event in history or like a celebrity who has this interesting fact about them. And the 5 is on that person's Wikipedia page as soon as they can, and like 3 hours later, they could write a graduate level paper on that subject. Right? That's something a 5 may do, right?
Yeah, 5s have an ability to kind of take in all the information and like translate to you like the more simple thing of rather than like the cliff notes of something. A 5 can do that for you pretty well.
Because knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So this I'm not a 5. I'm an 8, but 8s go to 5 under stress. Right? So I can. Some of this rings true, and I. Does anyone else keep the IMDb app on your phone, the Internet Movie Database? Okay, a few of you. Anyone out, like you see the movie and like 5 minutes into the movie, especially if you're watching it at home and not at the theater, like you need to know what else they were in. You see what they were in, and you're like, They were not in that. No way. Who did I think this was then? And then you're looking up the TV show you thought they were in, and then you're surprised by who used to write for that TV show. I mean, this is, if you've ever spent too long on the IMDb app, you might be a 5. Right?
Competency is a massive thing for 5s, and so the way they are competent in the world is by having all the information about something. That's what's safe for them. That's how they can go from their brains, come out of their head, and be actually present in the world.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to move on to the 6. We've said this every week. I just want to repeat it now. Everything Seth says about a type isn't necessarily going to be true of you if that's your type. So don't get too hung up if you identify with most things that are true, but the lost childhood message doesn't resonate. Or you identify with most things that are true, but when Seth shares that anecdote of his friend, that doesn't resonate. We're painting a broad canvas as an on-ramp into understanding what might be your type or a type of someone you love. So let's keep rolling, but I just wanted to kind of get that disclaimer out there again.
Yeah, I will say it's helpful to remember that a lot of the stuff isn't so much defining you as it's describing you. Defining you puts you in a box. Describing you gives you some leeway.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Jump into the 6. I'm going to leave the stage for a minute, but just jump right in.
I'll be lonely without you. All right. The 6. The 6 is often called the loyalist, or I like the devil's advocate. 6 is key motivations. They have a need for security, to feel supported, to have approval of others, to test the attitudes of others towards them, and to defend their beliefs. So 6s are sort of scanning the horizon for danger. Their fear creates doubt and anxiety, and they visualize what they're afraid of by worst case scenarios. This is usually a pretty common thing for 6s, is that they're kind of thinking through worst case scenarios pretty often. Sometimes they're noticing that they're doing that, sometimes they're not. But the way that 6s manage fear is worst case scenario planning. So the unconscious need for 6s is security, largely because what they fear most is fear itself. Danger, uncertainty, chaos, being blamed, being in trouble, being cowardly, submissive, alone, targeted, unsafe, and physically abandoned. And so their core desire is to have security and support. The thing is when security is your guiding principle, you often want predictability that life can't offer. And so for 6s, it can be hard to move towards goals when you're always second guessing, which is a big thing for 6s. They tend to be kind of the number that is doubting themselves the most. But they have trouble trusting themselves. And so they're always looking for courage. 6s walk into a room and subconsciously think, where is the danger? Where are the exit signs? And how can I protect the people that I love? It's the last thing I think of when I walk into a room. How do I get out of here? Just in case something goes down. It's not important to me at all. I'm fine with burning in this room, I guess. I went dark, sorry.
In case you're visiting us tonight, it's a very safe place, and we have fire alarms and sprinklers and everything. Don't worry about it.
It's true. If you're a 6, you already know where they are, probably.
Yeah, 6s came in here and they noticed where the emergency exits are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The focus of attention for 6s, again, this is where your energy naturally gravitates to without realizing or thinking about it, is hidden intentions. Hidden intentions. 6s believe sometimes that the world is a slippery slope and that people do have hidden agendas. So 6s always have an eye on authority. I have noticed that a lot of 6s, not every 6, but a lot of 6s are into conspiracy theories. If you're a 6, I'd love to see if that's true of you. So 6s are super loyal and committed. That's why they're called the loyalist. They're very friendly. Often, I recognize a 6 pretty quickly because they're super friendly with you immediately. That's one of the first things they do. So they're the ones that hold organizations together. They're sort of the glue. The home, family, education, church, all their decisions are sort of based on those values. 6s can tend to be comfortable with receiving answers to questions they haven't answered yet. Does that make sense? So they're looking for security.
I was still thinking about conspiracy theories. Can you repeat that one more time?
No. Yeah. I like doing this with you, Matt.
I do too. I'm so curious when you like hang out with your really smart Enneagram friends and you guys are, doing whatever you do during the week. You're like, I was speaking at this church and this one guy was so dumb. He kept making. Keep going though.
That doesn't happen.
There's not like a secret society of you guys who are like. There is though, kind of.
I do have an Enneagram symbol tattooed
No!
right here. Oh boy, we've gone off the rails pretty quickly.
We're gone.
Here we go. So 6s are look to friends and family and coworkers and experts for advice before making big decisions. 6s tend to usually, if not always, identify with the underdog. 6s are problem solvers. They, what's that say? I think I have a typo here. I never mind. I just can't read. They're problem solvers. So in a space where you're all kind of thinking about something that you're about to make a massive decision, you really need a 6 in the room because they're the ones that are going to be like, well, wait, have we thought about this option? I don't know if that's a good idea. So it's good to have 6s kind of think through things first, because this is really important. Doubting isn't all bad. Doubting is good because you can kind of take in all the options and see which one maybe is going to work. You've got dreamers out there who are going to be like, let's just go for it. And then there's all these other things out there, if you didn't have a 6 in the room, that you're going to run up against and you would have never thought about. So 6s often play the devil's advocate. They tend to question to understand, not because they mistrust you. Getting clear is why they're asking questions. They're not doubting you. This is another way to be compassionate towards them and not take their behavior personally. I've heard it said that 6s aren't asking questions so much because they don't know the answer already, but to confirm what they already do know because they're doubting pretty often. The lost childhood message for the 6 is that you are safe. And because they didn't hear it enough or believe it to be true of them, the result is that they take on an unconscious message and think that it's not okay to trust yourself. So the deadly sin or the passion, the emotional suffering or habit for the 6 is fear. And this passion might be more accurately described as anxiety because anxiety leads us to be afraid of things that are not actually happening now. 6s walk around in a constant state of apprehension and worry about possible future events. There's a difference between anxiety and fear, and it's a really important thing for 6s to kind of recognize the difference between the two. Anxiety is about possible future things that could happen. Fear is about what's in front of you that's actually happening right now.
And which tends to be more true of the 6?
Anxiety.
Anxiety about possible future things that might happen. Okay.
Yep, so it's really, really good, a helpful thing for 6s to recognize. Is this just something I'm building up to be something that's not true? That's anxiety.
They're playing out the worst case scenario.
Yes, yeah.
Gotcha.
So to finish up here, 6s at their best are loyal, likable, caring, warm, compassionate. Often they are, a lot of comedians are 6s. They're practical, helpful, and responsible. At their worst, though, 6s are hypervigilant, controlling, unpredictable, judgmental, paranoid, defensive, rigid, self-defeating, and testy. 6s then on the diagram move instinctively to the 9 space in secure situations and instinctively to the 3 space in stress. And I will say 6s are, how do I put it? 6s tend to be kind of the most extremely different versions of itself because fear is such a weird thing. There tends to be the phobic 6 and the counterphobic 6. These are terminologies in the Enneagram. Phobic 6 having to do with when I'm dealing with fear, I'm running away from it. That's what most 6s look like. That's how most 6s deal with fear. But the counterphobic 6, the one that doesn't often look like a 6 because of their behavior, is sort of like a rhinoceros. They're charging at fear. So you're going to see two very, very different sixes. A lot of what I've described is the way that you're running away from fear. But so you're going to have 1 6 that's, you ask them to bungee jump, and they're going to be the first person to say, no way at all am I going to do that.
That would be
crazy.
a phobic 6.
Yes, that's
They're making
crazy.
that decision based on the fear.
Yes. Yeah, what about the strap could come loose? What about, if it's too long and I actually hit my arm on something or whatever?
Yeah.
But the counterphobic 6 is going to be the first one to go and do it because they're charging at fear. That's how they're dealing with that's how they're coping with fear.
They cope with fear by running into it.
Yeah, so 6s tend to be the most extreme versions of itself, of any of the other types, which is why 6s actually tend to be, 6s and 9s tend to be the two numbers that have the hardest time figuring out what their type is.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
That's the 6.
So Seth, I think our very first week, we didn't even get into the types yet, but when we were starting this a few weeks ago, we had Tessa as a woman in our community here, and she came forward and said she thinks she's a 6. And I made the comment that a lot of Enneagram teachers think the 6 is the most populous number, that we have more 6s than any other number. You said that, obviously we can't know that for sure anyway, but you said that you don't necessarily believe that. Talk about why people think it is the most populous number and why you think it may not be.
Yeah, I like this question. So 6s are looking to authority to know security. They have an externalized sense of authority. Though the counterphobic 6, this is the one that runs at fear, they're looking to authority to, like, how can I bring them down? But the majority of 6s are looking to authority to know what to do, to know security, to be safe. So if you think of it that way, you look at a leader, you look at any specific kind of leader role, and the majority of the world kind of goes with what we tell them is true, right? I heard a story one time of some news channel talked about how dishwashers were breaking down and starting fires or something. And the next thing, Home Depot, the next week, they had like the most sold dishwashers in the last 2 years or something. But this is like, that form of authority is telling them you need to go get something taken care of. And so everybody is going to buy new dishwashers because there's a chance for that, Yeah. So 6s look to authority to know security.
So you're saying what sort of normal behavior for most of the population can get interpreted as behavior common of 6s.
I think so, yeah.
Whereas just sort of people in general, and this, I believe, as a pastor, this goes into how God made us. We're not made to find our identity in and of ourselves. We're made to find our identity by a fixed point. As Christians, we would believe that fixed point is God. We find our identity in relation to God. But all people, even if they're not following the way of Jesus, are looking for a source outside themselves to give direction. So that could lead to more people appearing as 6s than maybe really are 6s.
Yep.
Okay. Can I just, one kind of follow-up comment on the 6, then I'd love to go right into 7 if
Cool.
you don't have anything else. But I just want to share about that experience we had when we did a staff development day on the Enneagram. So I'll kind of pull the curtain back a little bit on Church of the City staff. A few months ago, another Enneagram teacher came in and spent the day with our staff and talked through all 9 types. And with each type, he would invite anyone who thinks they're that type to stand up. And you remember how many people stood up when we got to the 6?
No one, right?
One person.
One person.
Jory.
That's right.
Yeah, so one person. I don't know, including part-time staff. There's probably nearly 80 people in the room. It is a packed room. And we had 2 5s and 1 6. And the teacher, he didn't say this immediately to the whole group, but he shared it with a couple people. Maybe he shared it with you, but this kind of circulated. He mentioned, that's not necessarily a great thing to have such a disproportionate thing. I actually think he commended our staff for being, other than this 5 and 6, pretty well balanced among the other 7 types. But he mentioned 6s, and I think this came up with you, they often are some of the best workers you'll have in any setting. And it really stood out to him as to us having such a low number. So as you were talking, I don't know, this came to me, but I wanted to read from 1 Corinthians 12. This is one of the key passages in the New Testament that talk about spiritual gifts. It's beginning in verse 4, 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 7. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. For those of you who are only half listening, I did not just equate Enneagram types with spiritual gifts. But I do think that the broader point we're talking about here is that in God's kingdom, as God makes each of us unique, he wants a diversity of gifts and passions and characteristics coming to the table for the greater good. And as you're describing a scenario where people are planning and they're strategizing and they're vision casting, we need the sixes to be in there saying, hey, that might not work. Hey, that might hurt somebody. And just like we said last week, the point in all of this is not to hold up the Enneagram, but for us as people trying to follow Jesus, how do we think and live wisely in our times? In your workplaces, in your friend groups, in your relationships, I think it's important to bring a diversity of points of view and opinions to the table for wise decision making and wise planning. And I was both struck by how, we probably need to hire some sixes at Church of the City, but also just how much that resonates with Paul's words there in 1 Corinthians 12. Seven's going to be fun to talk about. Anything else you want to say before we go to the seven?
If you're a six, a lot of people in stress, or like when something goes down, everybody's like, whoa, I don't know what to do. What do we do? Sixes are actually the one they move to the 9 in secure situations. They've already thought about all the options that could go down. So when something does go down, they're the calmest person in the room, and they've already seen how to do everything, and they're taking care of it. So that's how you can see the six in the room when everybody's freaking out. Something's happening, some situation's gone down. Oh, there's a six. He's like very calmly working through things and figuring it out and taking care of the situation.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about 8 of the 9 types. We're going to talk about the 7 now. I'm not going to single anyone out and ask you to come up, but who still is not quite sure what you think your type is? Would be one to raise their hand. Okay. All right, a couple. Cool. All right, this will be fun. All right, 7s. They're so fun. The people in here who know they're 7s are like, finally, talk about me. This is going to be so fun. Let's play games. No, all right. Go,
I've heard it said that it's good to stop or finish with the 7s because that's how you keep their attention. Because they're waiting for you to finally talk about it.
All right.
Now I know what I am.
There it is. All right, we got 7. Good. All right, we're going to have a party later. All right.
All right, 7s. I like the title enthusiast. 7's key motivations are to be happy and satisfied, to have a wide variety of experiences, to keep their options open, to enjoy life and amuse themselves, and to escape anxiety. So 7s pursue positive and stimulating ideas in order to overcome feelings of fear and intimacy. So they often live with a smokescreen of activity. Anything monotonous and routine for a 7 is a turnoff. When life gets repetitious or painful, they flee externally. They run away from it. They escape. 7s don't want to feel like they're being fenced in, and they learn to keep their options open. So 7s are natural planners. Not often are they actually too present, depending on their level of health, to the moment, because they're planning on what's going to be next. That's how they're dealing with the repetition of this moment and the possibility that I could get stuck in it. They're planning in their minds about what could be next. So they insist on spontaneity. That's a really, really important thing, and I don't know if I should go there or not.
Go there.
Go there.
It's cool. 7s won't be offended. They just, it's fun.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
He's ready.
If you attend here on Sunday mornings, if you go to all 3 services, you'll notice that there's not the same set list for each service. 7s insist on spontaneity. And you'll notice that in the worship leaders' songs, how they're different every service. That's an example of a 7's mind.
You can definitely talk about it. He's not going to care.
The brilliance of the 7's mind at work. I really do think that's why Chris McClarney as good of a worship leader as he is.
He is the 70th 7 ever. And if you want to understand, if you want to have a fun but also insightful conversation about sevens, Chris was interviewed a few months back on Annie Downs' podcast, and she's a 7 as well, right? And there's the whole podcast is not about the Enneagram, but Chris and Annie talking about the experience of being a 7 will shed more light on this. So just before I forget, but yeah, man, the set list thing. Most people didn't realize that. And now someone's going to go to all 3 services next week just for worship at least, and they'll be, yeah.
Yeah, if you're a musician on that stage, it's tricky because you're like, I have no idea what's coming. I have no idea. And it's really fun, actually.
All right, so if you want to have fun with the Enneagram, some of you may not know this, Seth's wife, Sarah, manages the worship and production departments. And as we talked about before, she's a 1, okay? So 1's black and white, very driven. There's a right way to do things. And there's the 7, spontaneity. So,
but 1s have a line to a 7. So it's
right.
really good to hang around 7s.
All right,
so
keep going. We'll get to this.
They can let go a little bit. Yeah. All right. So I had breakfast the beginning of last year with a friend who's a 7, who I think over long enough discussion, he began to realize that all the past experiences where he moved to a new location or he moved jobs, he was able to think hard enough about the fact that every one of those moves were him bouncing to not deal with something that had become too painful for him. And in the moment, he wasn't recognizing that. It was just, let's do the next thing. But often, big life changes that seem pretty spontaneous or weird or drastic, or I'm just going to buy a plane ticket and go to another country, it's often for 7s the way that they're not dealing with pain. So 7's unconscious need is to avoid pain, largely because what they fear most is being incomplete, inferior, limited, bored, trapped in emotional pain, sadness. They fear disappointment, criticism, and missing out on something. This is FOMO. This is the 7.
The FOMO type.
Yes, the FOMO type. So their core desire is to be satisfied and content. This is why they're always looking for the next thing. So 7s walk into a room and subconsciously think, how can I add more energy or make this feel like a special occasion? 7's focus of attention, again, this is where their energy naturally gravitates to without realizing it, is on pleasant options. 7s are in the fear triad, but they often don't look afraid. They look cheerful and maybe even unafraid, but they handle fear by diffusing it, by focusing on best-case scenarios and positive things. And 7s can reframe anything in real time from negative to positive with an instant. 7s enjoy being the life of the party, but people don't often see that their deeper side, they have a deeper side, and they want you to know that they have a deeper side, but they're okay with being the life of the party more often than just letting, they're more okay with that, people recognizing them as that than being the deeper version of themselves. So for 7s, life's a party. The glass is half full. They're usually really great storytellers. They're really adventurous. They're super fun to be around, and they're definitely fascinated with other people's lives. So 7s can manipulate others by distracting them and insisting that others meet their demands. 7s, this is interesting. I don't know if this is true for every 7. I don't think it is, but it is for a lot of 7s I know. They tend to interrupt you in a conversation. The thing is they want you to do the same because that's how they know you're engaged with them.
So interrupt them
laughing
back?
about that.
Interrupt them back? Is that what you're saying?
It's often how they know you're hanging in the conversation, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of 7s in this room right now. But there literally are. Some of you are like, oh, it's passive aggressive. No, there's a lot of 7s.
And this is, again, this is pleasant options. This is planning about what's next, what's coming. Sometimes people describe it as 7s have this monkey mind. And so, they're...
Ooh, look, a tree.
Yes, they're interrupting you because they're thinking about the next thing all the time. But it's helpful all this stuff comes back to, you have to remember that this is their way of defending against, these are defense mechanisms for 7 that they've learned in childhood, that they've taken on, that they don't realize. Everyone has this. So, the lost childhood message for sevens, and you may or may not relate with this one. Sometimes these lost childhood messages have to be teased out a little bit. But for the lost childhood message for the seven is that you will be taken care of. And because they didn't hear it enough or believe it to be true of them, the result is that they take on an unconscious message that it's not okay to depend on anyone for anything. So their deadly sin or their passion is gluttony. And again, this is an older word. It doesn't just mean, food related. Gluttony refers to the insatiable desire to fill oneself up with experiences. Sevens attempt to overcome feelings of inner emptiness by pursuing a variety of positive, stimulating ideas and activities, but they actually never really feel that they have enough. So to finish up here, sevens at their best are fun-loving, spontaneous, imaginative, productive, enthusiastic, quick, confident, charming, and curious. Though at their worst, sevens are narcissistic, impulsive, unfocused, rebellious, undisciplined, possessive, manic, self-destructive, and restless. And finally, sevens on the diagram move instinctively to the 5 space in secure situations and instinctively to the 1 space in stress.
Seth, thank you. That's great. We laugh a bit, but kidding aside, sevens can be really wonderful and lovely people to spend time around. Brantley, who's on our staff here, he's in the back. Brantley is a 7. He'd be the first to tell you that. And I know some others of you in here are 7s as well. Seth, I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it. I apologize. But one helpful way for me to learn about 7s was 7s are your friend who often you text them and say, "Hey, do you want to go grab dinner Friday?" They'll say something like, "Yeah, probably," but they won't commit because they never want to commit. Not because they don't like you or not because they don't value spending time with you, but they hate the idea of tying themselves down and then missing out on something more fun. So like dinner with you sounds fun. What if someone else offers them concert tickets? Right?
Yes, and it's not something you take personally. This is, again, a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
This is the way that they deal with this massive fear of the fact that I could be trapped in the emotional pain of not doing something that I would rather do because it's even more fun.
Yeah. A lot of 7s tend to be really great storytellers, right? And tell long stories often, right?
Yeah.
I think that's how it's been described to me.
Sure.
I think I know some people who have struggled in identifying the type between a 7 and an 8, and I'm going to try this out. Tell me if this is right or not. Like, 8s they're in the gut triad. 7s are in the head triad. 8s anger is going to play a bigger part of an 8's story. So while 8s and 7s might have some similar behavior because they both, there's kind of a drive for more, there's a drive for excitement. I don't know if this language is too simplistic, but 8s are going to come across as more angry in their passion and enthusiasm. 7s maybe more excited. I don't know. Fix this. Make this better.
I would always come back to the passions. This is the emotional suffering or the emotional habit. For the 7s, it's gluttony and insatiable need to fill oneself up. So new things always, they can feel a little blurry as a person, I think, kind of just because they're in all the hands are in all the, not just one cookie jar, all the cookie jars. And 8s, so it tends to feel a bit like they're kind of frenetic. Is that a word?
Yeah,
I think
you're
I
doing
used
good.
that earlier. It's the second time today I've used the word frenetic.
Did you play words with friends earlier in the week?
No.
All right, keep going.
8s are considerably more direct.
Okay.
Like right here, you're with an 8. The 7 is all like this,
Okay,
The 8's
sure.
right here.
Cool. That's cool. So I hope I don't think this person would mind me saying this. Matt Smallbone is a 7. Right? So Matt's our lead pastor of our East Nashville church. And I remember when Matt was interviewing to work at the church, we were talking about the Enneagram, and he was kind of newer to discovering his type. And he said something to the effect of like, I don't know, I think I'm probably a 7, but if not, I'm a 9 or a 2. And I just remember thinking, you're like the most likable person ever. Like he just hit on the 3 most pleasant types to be around. And that's, again, kind of a shallow interpretation. But in general, 7s are really, kidding aside, really enjoyable to be around. Like a well-integrated, healthy 7. I mean, they're just great, right?
Yeah, that's interesting that Matt said that. I didn't know that story. There are sort of different styles in how each type deals with conflict or a challenge. And 7, 9s, and 2s are actually grouped together in a specific triad called
the positive outlook triad.
Oh, yeah.
So all 7, 9s, and 2s are often tend to be the last one to see there is an issue. We'll kind of bring in the idea of, oh, it's going to be fine. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be great. No worries. Like
Yeah.
7, 9s, and 2s, and they're all sort of the ones not wanting to deal with something that could be difficult or painful.
Yeah. Well, I love that this even comes right after you talking about the 6s, right? And go back to this idea of the need for the diversity of personalities and gifts and perspectives, and how we are best when we're all bringing our full self to the experience. To look at a challenge in a 7 to be able to see the best possible outlook and to bring this enthusiasm that we can do this, we can figure this out. In 6s to come in thinking critically, thinking, I don't know, there's some danger here. When they're both working together, that's such a beautiful picture of the body of Christ.
Definitely.
And it's one reason why I do think it's valuable for Christians to study the Enneagram is it helps us grow in empathy and compassion for our brothers and sisters. And I won't go so specific on this now because I want to give you some time at your tables. But one thing I hope now that we've talked about all 9 types is for you to maybe even think about and do this respectfully, but to think about maybe certain people who you have a hard time loving, or certain people who you have often found yourself thinking, gosh, why do they do that? And if you can think about maybe what their type is, and now begin thinking about, no, we need that balance. Like potentially, it's hard for you to love certain people because their way of engaging the world is so different from yours, and we need that balance. We all need one another, and just I don't know that some of the contrast of the 6 and 7 I think is really cool. We can do that about all the types.
Yep.
Before they go to the tables, anything else you want to say about the 7s?
Specifically about 7s, nope. They're
Okay.
just super fun.
Cool, they're
They really
super
are.
fun. Wrote sort of the same sort of generic questions to just kind of think through the different types as we had last week. You don't even really need to use that discussion guide, but take 10 minutes or so, react to these types, and then we'll do 2 things at the end. You'll have a chance to ask Seth any questions you want to ask him, and then I just want to give a couple closing comments on this series, and then we'll get some food, and if you can stay for 10 more minutes, we're going to talk about volunteering. So a lot of fun still to come. Thank you, guys.